and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, The Koran for Beginners, with Mekye Abdus Salaam.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wade Franson. I'm your host with Created in the Image of God. Tonight, we have a very special show. We have an imam with us, and we've had him on the air before. It was some months ago, and at that time, we had technical difficulties, and most people couldn't really hear what he was saying. We had a test run in which everything worked perfectly, and right before we went live, we've been having a few technical issues again. But I'm going to invite the audience and myself to issue a quick silent prayer. Is there any remover of difficulties save God? Say, praised be God, he is God. All are his servants and all abide by his bidding. Perhaps that will assist us in removing any remaining technical difficulties. And without further pause, we'll invite Mekye into the studio and find out.
How are you,
Welcome, my
brother?
friend.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, you know, the devil works in mysterious ways. He seems like when he wants us to get working, he wants to interfere. So how are you, my friend?
Well, we're very, very pleased. I'm doing just wonderful. We're very pleased to have you in the studio this evening for this show, The Koran for Beginners. And as the audience knows, we typically like to follow the theme of created in the image of God by finding out your creation story. Where did you come from? What is your origin story? Even going back to your parents, where they came from, and how it is that you were brought forth into this world, just to get to know you a little better. So I'm also going to throw in a nice little twist there and say that I'm very interested and curious as to how one becomes an imam. And I'm sure there are many, many paths to that, but looking forward to hearing your particular version of that. So please do share with us a little bit about your early years, your background, where you come from.
Okay. Well, first of all, my name is Mekye Abdus Salaam. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. My family is Southern. We were raised and reared in Augusta, Georgia. Oh, I'm sorry. This is sliding. Please forgive me.
We were moving up to heaven while you were descending. I don't know where.
Well, you know, we try to avoid these difficulties here.
Yep.
So, just a little bit about my background. I was raised in a multi-faith family. Mainly, most of my family were Christian. I've actually have a background in parochial school. I was raised in Catholic school. In my high school and junior high school years, I was introduced to the Pentecostal and Presbyterian denomination of Christianity. Islam has always been in the forefront of who I was spiritually, even before I understood or knew. I was one of those people who always questioned when there was a conflict in scriptures. It said one thing, and then because of the type of education and where I was educated at, we were never allowed to question whether or not a verse in the Bible or a verse in the Torah or a verse in the Koran specifically said this or that. You was just supposed to accept it as it is. And through my life journey, I began to question things on my own. But the uniqueness of me starting to be brave enough to question these things, I realized that the divine word was not just maybe established in one book or another. I realized that this was a chain of narration. And that's probably one of the things that I want to kind of like talk about today, because a lot of people have a misconception about what Judaism is, what Christianity is, what Islam is. And a lot of times these misrepresentation comes from the propaganda machine or hateful groups that have their agenda. So through my journey, I was able to see that the words in scriptures, whether it came from the Bible, whether it came from the Torah, or whether it came from the Koran, there was a consecutive message. And the general message that all three books were talking about was love, unity, and compassion, this mercy. And so when I started questioning certain theologians about these things, a lot of times when the question was difficult, it became to a point where we just had faith. We believe in it as it is, and we just don't question it. And that wasn't
Well,
good enough for me.
yeah, so let me ask you to pause there and let me go back on a couple of the points that you raised. The first one being, you mentioned that you come from a multi-religious background or an interfaith background, but I didn't catch where the Islamic connection came from. Was that one of your parents, or was that an exploration that you did on your own
Well,
independently?
I had a lot of friends that were Muslim far as actions and deeds. They didn't necessarily go around blabbing that I'm Muslim, just like I had my friends didn't go around blabbing that I was a Christian or blabbing that I was a Jew. But my Muslim friends, I noticed they had a different walk. Their walk wasn't even just about scriptures. It was the way that they were raised. It was the way that they did things. It was the way that they dressed. It was their mannerisms. And the irony is, prior to my mom passing, she passed a few years ago. One of the things that I recall growing up is that in Islam, we use the word adab. It means like mannerisms and approaches. And this is one thing she always had us do, all my siblings, and a few of them are probably on the air as we speak. It was always yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. And Islam has that same kind of discipline. The younger person or the child knew it's his or her place. And there was a reverence that was given to the adults or those who were in authority or charge over us. And the thing that differentiated Islam and the Quran for me was there was never a punishment or never a consequence behind asking a question. And that's what made me walk more so towards my Islamic faith, more so than following Christianity or Judaism. And allow me to elaborate on that just a little bit. I always felt like I was a Muslim because I understood the term of what Muslim meant, meaning submission to the will of God. But I have Christian friends who I think are more Muslim than some of the quote unquote religiously claiming Muslims are today. Same thing with some of my Jewish friends. They were more Muslims because of their submission, their obedience, their contribution to society. And so I think one of the things that I hope we talk about today is that, being a Muslim is not necessarily a religion, it's a lifestyle. It's how we approach everyday life and interacting with people. And it's funny that you asked about my multi-faith family and background, because Islam, and I don't want this to be in contention with anyone, but Islam truly distinctive from the very beginning was a religion that kind of propagated interfaith worship. There's a verse in the Quran, Surah 4, 136, where God talks about the people of the book, and that the Quran in and of itself is not a book with a new revelation, but one that comes to confirm the books and revelation that came before it. And those who were considered Muslim were those who believed in the oneness of God, who believed in the angels, who believed in all of God's books, who believed in the messengers. We ain't just talking about the Prophet Muhammad. We're talking about from Adam all the way throughout. Every messenger that we speak of, except maybe the Bab, has been mentioned in the Quran al-Karim. So this was something that was unique to me and that sat with me, like really stuck with me, because it was the only religion that didn't negate the Christians or the Jews, where in the other perspective, the Jews had issues with, or some Jewish people or Hebrew people had issues with Christians. And some Christians had issues with the Jews or the Muslims. And therefore, but the Quran was the only book that initially mentioned the Christians and the Jewish people and said that they were all not alike. And there were those who were submissive and did these acts of ibadah or acts of worship that were considered Islamic. And those people are getting their paradise, or they're going to gain their reward in paradise. And, God or Allah made this very clear in the Quran. And a lot of people don't even understand or know that.
Thank you. So one of the other questions that I wanted to go back and follow up on, and then we'll come back to where you're at right now in the narrative, is you mentioned, there were Muslim friends that you had that weren't blabbing about the fact that they were Muslim, and Christian friends that weren't blabbing about the fact that they were Christians. And this just reminded me of something I've frequently said, which is that in the Bible it says we should be the light of the world, right? Jesus says we should be the light of the world, not the loudspeaker.
Absolutely.
And what I've come to think about a lot is that people can profess whatever they want.
Right.
And it's to the point where there's almost something that can be almost profane about professing, right? And we're cautioned in the Holy Writings, about our words, right? It's so easy to say things. And it's also easy, therefore, to be a hypocrite, right? To have our deeds not match our words. It's like the easiest thing in the world to be a hypocrite. Just go off at the mouth and then don't follow up.
Well, if I may say, Wade, that's one of the things that I loved about Islam, and I push. My friend Hamza will also attest to this, that sometimes, it's not conducive to just speak. Let your actions precede what you're going to say. Like, there's an expression that I've always adopted. I've heard at a very young age. And that, when you're walking your walk, people should be able to identify what you are. Maybe they won't know if you're Muslim, Christian, or Jew, but they know that you are a God-fearing person by what you do. I shouldn't have to don the kufi or the Islamic garb, the jalabiyah, to be known that like, oh, that's a Muslim. It should be my actions and deeds that precede what I say to, okay, he's different. And then it becomes warm and opening that people like, I want to know a little bit, like, as you asked, a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Why do you do what you do? And a lot of times I'll just say, because the scriptures or the Quran or the Bible, it tells me to do these things. Now, I don't want to sit here and portray like I'm perfect. I've made mistakes in life. But in the same walk, there's times where God done reeled me in and was like, okay, enough is enough. and I need you to get back on your job. And, this is where I'm at in life at this present time. My
Well, and
whole life is. Mhm.
speaking of that, we met. I think we met over the topic of the Interfaith Library,
Absolutely.
which you have launched, and we're going to take a commercial break here in a minute and show a little ad for that. But you've also invited me to blog on that site, which I've started doing, and as the audience I think knows, I'm a Baha'i, and I'm blogging about the Baha'i faith on that. And in the last blog that I wrote, I quoted the Quran: "No distinction do we make between any of his messengers," right? Which is something you were alluding to earlier about the Quran being a book, and naturally because of its place in history. I mean, obviously, the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the law, the prophets, and the writings. Christians would interpret it as having a lot to say about Jesus, in terms of prophetic references, but they're not specific or explicit in the sense of looking back from a historical perspective, right? Of course, Jesus spoke a lot about the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and what the promises were for them, and where they had gone off track, and what was yet to come. And so the Quran also has that benefit. Would you agree with that, of being at a point in history? Now, God is obviously omniscient. I like to explain that, since we understand time and space to be a function of the creation, right? The movement of the planets and stars, and Einstein's, explanations of the theories of specific relativity and general relativity, and his theories about time itself. Obviously, the creator sits outside of that, which might be hard to understand or comprehend, but therefore, the creator knows the past, present, and future because he sits outside of time and space. But we do not. And in that sense, the words of the Quran have the benefit of commenting on the past in a way that the Torah and the Gospels do not, right? And therefore also to mark a point in time and project out into the future, right? So um, the topic tonight is a beginner's, the Quran for beginners. So maybe we just begin with that question before this commercial break. And I would just like your comment on that sort of perspective of its unique place in time.
Okay. So, well, let me just say, first of all, when the Quran was revealed, before we can get there, I mean, how much time do we have, Wade? Because
we have an hour, and
no, I'm
we
saying
often go
before
later.
the commercial.
Just go. We'll run with it.
All right. So
I am the small g god of the timing of the commercials. I run them when I want.
Okay. So, just to give the audience a perspective, I like the way that you said it was a timing issue when the Quran was revealed. But before we can really have an understanding of that, we have to understand the path in which this revelation came into. So prior to, as the audience may know, there were four major books. So we know the Torah, which was given to Musa or Moses. And then from there was revelation that we as Muslims call the Zabur. And the Zabur were given to Dawood or King David, which is today recognized as being the Psalms. And then, of course, the Injil or the Bible, which were the Gospels that were given to Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus Christ, the Messihi, Isa ibn Maryam, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And then, of course, the final revelation, which we Muslims say that was the final revelation from this path of suhufs, was the Quran al-Karim. So prior to these four books, a lot of God-fearing people or people of scriptures or people of religious background don't realize that there were revelations preceding these four books. But they were not considered books. The word we use in Arabiya is called suhufs, or they're more like parchments or scrolls or manifests. And It starts all the way back to the prophet Adam. Adam was given 10 of these suhufs. There was 100 in total. And then, of course, we know the story about a Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel. And then God blesses Adam and Eve with another righteous son. Excuse me. And his name, according to the Bible, is Seth. In Islam, we call him Sheath. And he was given 50 of these suhufs. And then from that, there was a lineage that led up to Prophet Idris. And in the Bible, he's known as Enoch. Enoch was given 30 of these suhufs. And then finally, the last 10 suhufs was given to Ibrahim. Now, the irony why I'm bringing all that in is because at the time Ibrahim had these 10 suhufs, he had the compilation of 100 of these manifests or these legislations or these regulations for humanity that God had sent down through this whole timeline. And then it was the issue which divided us. I like to say the devil started putting his little hands into work. And this is what divided us, because now it became an issue. Where's the righteous covenant? Was the covenant through Isaac, or was the covenant through Ishmael? And we can get into a real nice academic discussion about this, but the Christians in the Judeo tradition say that Isaac inherited the birthright. We as Muslims have a problem with that because Isaac was 11 to 13 years younger than Ishmael. Just real brief. And in Deuteronomy makes it clear that the birthright was inherited to the firstborn. Now,
let's put a pin in it, because this is a really fascinating discussion that I want to have. Okay. But I think this is a good time to break for the commercial. Fine. And emphasize the Interfaith Library, because whatever the outcome is of this discussion, and on this show we will not argue on
no, we don't.
And on, in my faith perspective, if we're arguing, we're both wrong. And so absolutely. there's no reason either of us should press or push our point. But I look forward to looking at the different perspectives, and I hope the audience will find it as fascinating as I do. What you've said so far, I'm just sitting here and I'm drinking it all in. It's just wonderful and fascinating to get your perspective on this. And I'm so grateful that you founded the Interfaith Library. So let's take a look at this ad we have prepared for that. Okay. And before we go, I want to also mention that we will be giving a free book away. Maybe we'll even give a couple away on this show to the person or persons in the chat who have the comments that our guest, Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam, finds the most engaging for whatever reason. And we reserve the right to limit that to those who are in the U.S. I apologize to our international guests, but shipping books internationally is expensive. We might be able to accommodate. We might have to say no. But that shouldn't keep any of you from commenting. So please put your comments in the chat. We will visit them later. But right now, here's a quick commercial break about our guests' initiative, the Interfaith Library. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Wade France, and this is Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. I'm here with Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam, and there's a QR code. You can just point your device at that, and it'll take you to the Interfaith Library. I also was asked by one of the guests in the chat about the blog series I do there, and I went ahead and posted a link there as well, so you can get there that way as well. Right before the break, we were just hearing this fascinating explanation of how the Quran looks at history, and at a point in time is able to look back, and there were 100 scrolls, or there was a word for them,
Suhufs.
suhufs, that were distributed over time, all the way down from Adam down to Abraham. And at that point in time, there was a division that came because, and this is my perspective on it, because Sarah, was disbelieving that God would give her the child of promise. This is the story in the Bible. And so she brought her handmaid to Abraham in her human effort to fulfill the promise. And so Abraham had a son with Hagar, who was not Sarah's son, but he was Abraham's son. And as we know from studying the Holy Scriptures, it was very important to God, this matter of firstborn, right? And there's tension. Every family in the Bible has this tension around the birthright and the firstborn. One of my favorite passages is where Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, is old and blind, and Joseph brings his two sons to him. Now, Jacob's name was heel catcher because he had grabbed Esau's foot and pulled it back in after the handmaid tied a red thread around it, because he wanted to be firstborn. And then later he stole also the blessing from Esau. And he was this person who then had to suffer greatly in his life because of the deceit that he had engaged in his early years. And now his son Joseph brings Ephraim and Manasseh to him, and he's old and sight is not good, and he crosses his hands, putting his right hand on the younger son and not on the older son. And Joseph says, wait, no, you got it wrong. And he says, I know what I'm doing. So there's this stuff going on that, and before we get into the discussion around Ishmael versus Isaac, my take on it is that we may never really know the vast beauty of the tapestry that God has woven until much later, perhaps in the next life. In the meantime, it's something to marvel at, not to fight over.
And I agree with you. And if I may just, interject, and, when I was going through this explanation, I just want to make it clear for the audience and for you, this wasn't an issue about creating tension, or this was an issue of contention. My thing was just to explain that there was a covenant that was given to both of them. And
I'm glad you brought this up. I'm really glad you brought this up. And I think many in our audience don't even know what they're about to hear from you. I do. And so I wanted to couch it in that way so that we minimize any potential offense. But I look forward to hearing your perspective on this.
Well, the reason I brought it up, because people have to understand where what we call in Islam, in the Arabiya, the isnad, the chain of narration. Where did it come from? And did it just randomly come out of the thin air? Because everybody knows, the story of Isaac, and that he received this covenant and this promise. And through Isaac's bloodline was the Judeo-Christian tradition. And
well, hang on. Let's go back to Abraham first. God's promise to Abraham, he said, right? He said, leave your father and mother and go to a land I will show you, and Absolutely. I will what? I will do what?
Multiply.
Yes.
He will multiply his nation. I mean, it's supposed to be an infinity, beyond the stars in the heavens, and
sky and the sand of the seashore.
Absolutely.
If you could count those grains of sand, you would know how many children Abraham would have, and they would be, many nations, not just a vast multitude of people, but many nations.
And and this is one of the reasons why I'm very careful of using the word when I talk about the Jewish tradition using the word Jew, because Jews are only related to one of the 12 tribes of Judah. It's just the tribe of Judah. You're excluding the other 11
well,
tribes.
not necessarily, because there's also a national, right?
Well,
the
true.
first time the word Jews is used in the Bible, the Jews were at war with Israel, and
Absolutely.
Israel was the northern kingdom of 10 tribes, and Judah was the southern kingdom of 2.5 tribes. It was Judah and Levi and
Right.
half of Manasseh, and maybe some Benjamin thrown in there. And then you also
Absolutely.
had something called the remnant of Israel, because there were people who left Israel because the nation of Judah was more faithful for longer, and many of the people in Israel fled south because of their desire to be more religiously, correct according to the Torah.
Absolutely.
But thank you for bringing that up. Sorry
Well,
for.
but like I just, I guess the point I was making, through the lineage of Isaac was the Judeo-Christian ideology, and it's through the lineage of Ishmael was through the Islamic tradition. But when we take that crossroad and bring them back together, it still comes from the origin, or the lineage of scriptures to follow comes from those hundreds of hoofs, which was finally established with Abraham. So all the regulations, these books that we talk about today, the Torah, which most Hebrew or Jewish people use today, is not really the Torah, it's the Tanakh. And then, but
Yes.
but coming
Thank you.
from that is the Torah, the Zabor, which is given to David, which is the Psalms. There are some scholars who even mention Solomon with the Proverbs. But then again, we go on to the Gospels with Christ, and then the Quran with the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. So my whole point was, I'm bringing this up to establish a legitimacy for the Quran. I'm asking the audience, if they have never get you a translation of the Quran and read it for yourself. I'm saying everyone should read the Quran at least once. I'm not saying convert to Islam or not. I'm saying read it, because what happens is people are quoting and saying things about Islam or saying things about the Quran, and they haven't never read the book at all. So how can you speak about something you have no knowledge of?
Yeah, let me make a comment here. I'm sure that Jewish people among us, Christians among us, really take offense when people malign their religion, right? When people attack their religion,
right?
And it's typically, atheists or anti-religious, and who take verses out of context or misquote things or bring up spurious arguments. But let's reflect for a moment on how many of us, and myself included in a past life, did that same thing about the Quran without having ever read it, right? Taking something that I'd heard from somebody else, and didn't go bother to see if it was true or not, but it appealed to me because of my bias and my prejudice, and therefore I started repeating it.
Well, and it's interesting that you brought that up, because like my brother and companion Imam Hamza, who's here with us today, just a few months ago, we were in a community in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and we were feeding the community, free food for everybody, but we were giving out English translations of the Quran. And what shocked me was that there's still a population of humanity who's never even heard of the Quran, more so even reading it. Just like, what is this? I've never heard of this. And where this community is technically the Bible Belt. There were 12 main established Christian churches in this area, and there was no real understanding about Islam or the Quran. And Brother Hamza, I'm not giving him praise, but I'm commending him on this. When people were kind of reluctant to take the Quran, he said, before you do that, just read chapter 19. Chapter 19 is the chapter about Mary. The whole story of Christ is in chapter 19. And most of them were so shocked They was like, wait a minute, y'all, your Quran has a whole chapter on Mary. I mean, this isn't to denounce another scripture, but yes, the Quran has an entire chapter of Mary. And then one individual came to me and he was like, well, this is beautiful, but Muslims don't believe in Christ. And I said, who told you that? You just read the chapter. Well, how do we know you didn't just handwrite this? You know, we acknowledge that Christ was the Messiah. We acknowledge, because Allah says this in Quran, said he was the Messiah ibn Maryam. He was the Messiah, the son of Mary. And it also says that he was the Kalam of Allah. He was the word of Allah. It also says that Allah's spirit, his ruh, was with him. So when we had this conversation, and I said, where do we differ? We believe that Isa was the Messiah. We believe that he was the Kalam of Allah, the word. And we believe that the spirit or the ruh of God was in him. Where do we differ? And
well,
the thing is, it's just a difference in interpretation or a difference in understanding. And I'm saying that shouldn't divide us, because if we're literally saying that we agree with you without putting our own biases and prejudice and interpretation on, this is what God said, and this is what we do as Muslims when we recite the Quran. We take what God say, we don't put our own twist to it, and we just move out on it, period.
So I know where people differ on this, and I'm not even going to bring it up, but I'm going to make a comment, which is, one of the reasons I know where the difference is because I came from a denomination in which I was in the ministry, and we were given a series of, I think, 31-hour lectures by a scholar whom I greatly respected about the nature of God. And this 30 series, you know, back in the day, it was VHS. Every minister had to watch this, and there were some things in there that I disagreed with, and I disagreed with them from a theological perspective. And most of the ministry, in fact, almost 100% of the ministry disagreed with what was in that series of presentations before they went through it. But many of them became convinced of it, and now we had a debate about theology, a debate about the nature of God. And each side believed that they knew the truth about the nature of God. And this debate split the church right down the middle. And this wasn't just a church, this was a global denomination with people in like 140 different countries. And the whole denomination split right down the middle. And I was caught in the middle of this, and I was looking at this and the horror of it, right? The horror of it, and realize this is the stupidest thing, that we're arguing about something that none of us can really know, right?
Well, you know, if I may add to that statement, Wade, the beauty of it is the Quran, since we're talking about the Quran does something very beautiful when we're talking about the nature of God. You know, as I recited earlier, I told you about Surah 4, chapter 4, verse 136. But there is a lot of our belief system that comes from that is fundamentally explains the nature of God without necessarily making you feel like you have to delve into it. It's called Imam Mufassil, which is the seventh kalima, or the seventh active or testimony in Islam. And it goes a little something like this. Amantu billahi, I believe in God, or I believe in Allah, kama huwa, as he is. We don't put any conditions on who he is. But for those who want to receive that, we say, well, how is he? Well, we know he's Ar-Rahman and he's Ar-Rahim. He's the most compassionate. He's the most merciful. All of the attributes that we talk about when it comes to God, we talk about all the positive. But then we believe in all of the angels, wa kutubihi, and all of the books, wa rasulihi, and all of the messengers, wa yamil akhiri, and the day hereafter, wa qadri khairihi wa sharihi min Allah ta'ala. And we believe in death, life after death. You know, we believe that comes from that the qadr, the divine decree Good and bad comes from God because he's the best of planners. He knows what we know not. If I may share with the audience, just approximately 8 months ago, I never drank, I never smoked, I never abused my body, I never used illicit drugs. I was physically fit, I was an athlete, and for out of the blue, my heart just stopped. And I had to go undergo major heart surgery. And to this day, there is no explanation why my heart was in the condition that it was. It wasn't diseased. It didn't have. It just went bad and decided to stop this one day. But because of that, there's a verse in the scriptures that says, "Be still." It forced me to be still and to hear God, and it made me put more effort and more work into Interfaith Library. It made me be, and like I said, as a Muslim, yes, I have Muslim companions who struggle with Interfaith Library. Why are you doing this? And I'm doing this because this is what God commanded us to do. Like, if you really understood the scriptures, if you really understood the Torah, if you really understood the Bible, if you really understood the Zabor, if you really understood the Quran al-Karim, it talks about humanity. If if we come together and we have differences, let's come together on the things that we agree upon. Those things are greater than the things that we disagree upon.
Thank you. A couple of quick comments, and then we're going to go to another commercial break. The time's flying by, but I just love this conversation. The first comment is, where two or three of you are gathered together in my name, I will be there among you, right? And in the New Testament, Jesus also said, he that is not against me is for me, right? So this distinction, or trying to drive a wedge between what somebody professes on the one hand within Christianity and what somebody believes as a Muslim, and to sort of push that point to the point of argument and trying to prove somebody else wrong, or even worse, to sort of accuse one of our brothers, right, of not believing in something that they claim to believe in, right? So you claim to believe in and accept Jesus for who he was, right? I'm sure you would say that Jesus is everything he said he was and more, right?
Absolutely.
Right? And
Absolutely.
so what is there, but then somebody that's then trying to form some litmus test to prove that you are not of
being
us,
proven.
right? And anyway, I could go on and on about this topic, but I just am so grateful to what you've brought. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break because you don't yet have a book. I mean, you are writing, but I don't think you have a book to offer. Is that right, or am I mistaken?
I have my own. No, I have my personal biography. It's a hard read. Yes, I definitely do have my part one of three. I have 3-part biography coming out, but part one is available.
Okay.
And yes, I can, if you want to, add that to the prize. I'm willing to do that.
Okay, perfect. So I didn't know that, and I should have clarified what
it's called The Journey with a Life Sentence: A Black Man's Love Story.
What we can also do is create a little book trailer for you for future use. But the one we have ready in the studio is my own book. And so what we'll do is we'll do a twofer. You'll get mine and Mekye's. We'll go to that commercial break, and remember to put your comments in the chat. And perhaps we'll have Hamza join us if you'd like later to continue this discussion. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more from Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam, Koran for Beginners. And I hope all of you are enjoying this as much as I am. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
What do divorce, kidnapping, ancient prophecies, and the collapse of the Soviet Union have in common with the music of the Beatles? These are all elements of author Wade Franson's traumatic autobiographical journey, recorded in his best-selling book, The People of the Sign. He effortlessly weaves these elements together, proving once and for all that truth really is far, far stranger than fiction. Order your copy now on Amazon or by emailing orders@soupllc.com.
And there's that QR code if you'd like to order it, or just get active in the chat. So it occurred to me that we did not actually have you explain the Quran's version of the story of Abraham's sacrifice of his firstborn.
Well, it's a difficult discussion since, like you said, we're on this interfaith mission. The best way that I can articulate this without controversy or creating contention, we believe as Muslims that the sacrifice was not Isaac, that it was Ishmael. And the reason that we believe that can actually be also attributed to some of the words that were in the Bible. The Bible goes to say in English translation, because this is not in Hebrew, it's in the English translation, that God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, his only son. And then they interpolate the name Isaac. However, there's a problem with that just from the English perspective, because the word only implies that Ishmael wasn't alive or wasn't born or was not the son of Abraham. And if we're going to hold on to the word only, which is in the Hebrew language, then only means it has to be representative of the son, the only son that was alive. And at the time, Ishmael would have been 11 to 13 years older than Isaac. Now, if Isaac was alive and Isaac was the sacrifice, and we're not here to debate whether he was or not, then the word only, which is in Hebrew, should not be in it, because now Abraham has two sons. Now, here is the other thing I would like to add to that. The question or the debate that I've had with scholars in the past was the fact that Hagar, since you brought her up, was illegitimate. The Hebrew word for the wife of Abraham used for Sarah or Sarai was Aisha or Isha, depending on how you want to pronounce it. This exact same word in Hebrew was attributed to Hagar. The exact same word.
Let me clarify. No. Okay. I want to jump in and clarify something here. The Bible actually makes no distinction. Hagar was absolutely Abraham's legitimate wife.
There you go. That's the point. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, it's funny.
But some people say she was a concubine, she was illegitimate, his child was illegitimate, and therefore which
of Jacob's wives was illegitimate, because he had two wives and two concubines, right? Naphtali, for example, I just happen to know this one came from the handmaiden of Leah, right? Right. And so Rachel and Leah each had handmaidens, and there's this whole story about how they were competing to be the wife who had the more children, and Leah was the one giving birth, so Rachel gave Jacob her handmaiden, and then he was having children with her, and then Leah gave Jacob her handmaiden. So these women were competing with themselves and the handmaidens to have children by Jacob, but they were all the legitimate sons of Jacob. Nobody contests.
Right.
Nobody contests that these children were not of the 12 tribes of Israel because they came from the handmaidens.
Well, this is one thing I would like to ask the audience to do, because I don't want, the one thing that as a teacher or as a preacher or a lecturer that I do, I don't never want anyone to take what I'm saying, faith-based without investigating themselves. So for my Christian brothers and sisters who may be tuned in, get you a copy, if you don't already have one in your library, of the Strong's Concordance. And then go look these verses up for yourself, the story of Abraham. you will verify that the word used for Sarah and the word used for Hagar were identical. And even in English, if you don't want to go through the burden of doing this research, even in English, the Bible states that Sarah gave her servant to her husband Ibrahim as his wife. The word is just explicitly said like this in
Right.
every
So
English
so
translation. So we can't.
let's
The point
move
I'm
on,
making
because
is,
to me that's not even contested. But
well, some people do.
what understood. But what I want to know is, what does the Quran actually literally say
The
about this?
Quran literally says that the sacrifice was Ishmael.
No, what are the exact words? I'd like to know the exact words.
Oh, well, I have to get the Arabic. I don't have it
Because
with me at the time. I
because
wasn't prepared for that question. But
here's
it definitely was Ishmael's name.
here's my perspective, just to lay the groundwork here. Abraham, according to the Bible, just according to the Bible, which I know, because I've studied it for 50 years, Abraham sacrificed both his sons
Okay.
in two different ways.
Two different ways. Gotcha.
He sent, because Hagar, Sarah wanted to get rid of Ishmael. He sent Ishmael in the desert to die. Right. And an angel came and saved Ishmael, according to the Bible story.
Absolutely.
But that would have possibly been unbeknownst to Abraham at a moment in time. Right. Now, remember, you have a time element. And at one moment in time, you hear about a car crash, and the initial report is your son was killed, right? And you later find out that report was erroneous, but for a period of time, you believe your son is dead. I mean, just throwing that out there. So I want to know exactly what the Quran says, because I'm always fascinated. I'm always fascinated by people thinking there's a problem when maybe there's not even a problem.
There's not. But I will say this, and I will get that for anybody who can log back into your site or come to Interfaith Library. I will make sure that I specifically by tomorrow will have that whole, and you give me something to blog on tomorrow, that whole detail, so
Sure.
You can have it.
Well, we'll also have you back, but I love the fact that,
I just want to say this too.
Go ahead.
The sacrifice that the Quran explicitly talks about was the sacrifice of him being laid on the pillar and being stabbed. There was no ambiguity in whether it's was this the sacrifice, or as you, and I love the way you said that. But I'd also like
to know the sequence of time and the sequence of events, because
I'll give you the tafsir on that.
But the other thing that we know is that not every detail is recorded.
Well, we see, and the difference between Arabic or the Quran and other extraneous scriptures or sources, the Quran in and of itself has always been, since it was instated over 1,400 years ago. It's not just a literal read that any and everybody can just read and run off with. It has something what we call a tafsir. A tafsir is an explanation for every verse in the Quran. There are 6,236 verses. If you go to any of these tafsirs, it is an explicit explanation of every verse, 6,236 verses. In fact, some verses are so small that they can have 2 or 3 pages of explanation for that. And in the same regard, the other tradition that the Quran or Islam has that is beautiful, that works alongside with the Quran, we have these compilations called hadiths, which are explanations from the Prophet. And even those hadiths have a compilation called the Shar, which is an explanation
and it's the same. It's the same with the Hebrew scriptures, right? And the Tanakh.
Absolutely.
And then you have the Targums. And so, you have these layers. But the thing is, at some point, in the Baha'i faith, you also have something called Pilgrim's Notes, right? So, and we are told, they're available and we're encouraged to read them, but we're told don't trust them. Because
Really?
they are not authorized. They are, in other words, it's not don't trust them, but if there's a difference between a pilgrim's note and the higher level, you throw the pilgrim's note out, right? You follow me? So it's like that. There's a hierarchy. It's not that we
But
don't
the
study them.
The problem we have with those, like even in Islam, we have hadiths that have lesser or greater grades.
There you go.
We do.
Yep.
But the thing is where we differ, the Quran differs from a lot of the other scriptures. And I want to make two statements, which I hope everyone finds very interesting. The first statement I want to make is that when we look at scriptures, when I say scriptures, the Bible, the Old Testament, each version of the Bible may have books, depending on whether you're Catholic or whatever your denomination is, that are removed. But there is also a compilation of books, as we know, called the Apocrypha. And it's one of those similar things that you're saying, because these books have not been canonized. It's saying that we should, if you're a layperson, you should avoid reading them. But what leaves you kind of like incomplete, because you don't have different versions or the fulfillment of a complete story. So you have to kind of like piecemeal it. And this is where your own opinions start coming up. Well, maybe it's this, or maybe this fills in the gap. The other thing I want to share before you hold your thought, and this is something I remember one of my teachers said to me a long time ago. And again, I hope no one here takes offense to this. But the Quran, if we take every spiritual book, I'm going to just keep this short. If you take every spiritual book there is in the world, whether it's the Bible, the Torah, all of them, and throw them in the ocean. If you throw them in the ocean and they're all wiped off, within 24 hours to 48 hours, the Quran, we believe, will be the only book that will be written or come back exactly the way it was, because it is required amongst Muslims to remember every verse verbatim. And even amongst our audience, we may have a couple Muslims right here in our audience who can recite the Quran, all 6,000, either 236 verses from front to back. There was a time that before I got caught up into some distractions, that this was my life stone, just recite. But there are Muslims amongst us, they call Hafiz. I'm guaranteeing that in this conversation, there is one or two Muslims somewhere in here, could start right now, and if we were going to be here till tomorrow sometime, could recite the whole Quran from the beginning to the end. And this is one of the miracles of the Quran. We can't really say that about the Bible, because it's in English, and everybody's not going to remember every English word verbatim. In Hebrew,
no, it's not even in Hebrew. There are multiple original texts. There's Aramaic,
Exactly.
And then anyway, but so I don't know if Hamza would like to join us, if he's available. But
just invite him in.
I will. But I'm just giving him sort of advance warning versus pulling him by the nape of the neck. So
you're kinder than I am, because sometimes I don't give it to him. I was like, you just got to take over.
So I just wanted to welcome you, first of all, and invite you to introduce yourself in just 1 second. The reason I wanted to bring you into the studio is I love what you're saying about this knowledge of the Quran and the requirement or the strong encouragement or requirement to memorize the whole thing. I really want to get into the word jihad and have each of you sort of explain that, because to me it's this submission and this dedication that is to be celebrated here. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that. And so Hamza, please introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll bring up that topic a little bit.
And Hamza can go ahead and answer it first, because I'm interested in hearing if he's okay with it and his response.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello to everyone. First of all, I'm honored to have an opportunity to be on the program. It's an awesome platform. The dialogue that's going on between you two is wonderful. I just want to say that in your question about jihad, in its most basic understanding, as far as Islam is concerned, it's the striving. It's the striving of one's nafs, the strive to overcome personal things that may be going on in your life, personal things that may be affecting not just you, but that could be affecting others that you may have to overcome. So the jihad in the simplest context is something that will forever be a part of the human's makeup because we're always striving. And this is one of the reasons that we pray, not just as Muslims, but we all pray even as Christians, whatever of the three uh, the three
Abrahamic religions.
right faiths that are most known to us, the Jewish faith, Christian faith, and the Muslim faith. But on another level, then you have jihad also, where one may be implemented in terms of defending oneself, defending one's property, defending one's life. So the jihad that you hear when you may not you in particular, Brother Wade, but on TV when Islam is somewhat dehumanized, is this jihad, whereas though we go out and we take innocent lives, which is totally contrary to what jihad represents. And you see these Muslims yelling Allahu Akbar, running in the buildings and things of this nature. And this is totally not a practice of Islam. This is not what the Quran teaches. This is not what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought. And this is not, and as a matter of fact, we don't want to stop there. None of the prophets or messengers of God ever taught this way. So when we follow of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu wasallam is also based upon what the former prophets had brought before. So
right. Allow me to interject just one thought here, and that is that Jesus said, "Let him that is without sin cast the first stone."
Absolutely.
I challenge anyone to highlight a religion that did not have followers who have committed deeds like this, right?
Right.
So that is an important point. One doesn't judge the religion necessarily by the followers of that religion. Of course, one also does judge the religion by the followers, but in a limited way, right? So anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and it's a good point because this is a concept of jihad, and as a matter of fact, it's a name that some people actually name their children because those who understand the religion, they give these names which are glorifying Allah to our loved ones, and it's not in a way where as though to stigmatize what someone else may think of what the religion is when they may think of jihad in their mind. So we have to take an opportunity to demystify what has been made mystified amongst the people. And
Well said.
thank you. It was a great question, Brother Wade.
And to follow up with Hamza, I agree with him, and he kind of really took my words. Basically, what fundamentally jihad is a personal struggle. It's overcoming your personal struggles, whatever that may be. And yes, there is a time where you're allowed to defend yourself and defend your property and defend your family. But this is not even the jihad that the propaganda machine is propagating. It's making, like Brother Hamza said, this reckless abandonment of just murdering people for no reason whatsoever. And this is not Islam. And even though I don't know if you're going to ask this question, Brother Wade, but I'm going to also add another word that is sometimes misrepresented, and that's the word is Sharia. All the Sharia is a divine order or legislation or regulations or provisions or injunctions that your scriptures have ordered you to do. And because, when we say as Muslims, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Hurimat alaykumul mayta wadam walahim khinzir. Forbidden unto you is the metat, meat that hasn't been slaughtered properly, the blood, drinking of blood, and the flesh of the pig. So when a Muslim adheres to that, he's actually adhering to the Sharia. He's
Right.
he's 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 staying away from those things that were considered haram or forbidden, and
Right.
he tries to enjoin on those things that are permissible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in Quran, Amr bil maruf nahil anil munkar. Command the right and forbid the wrong. This is part of the Sharia. And the irony is, I'm going to leave the pig issue alone, but the irony is, Amr bil maruf is a legislation or Sharia that's in every religion. Command the righteous
Right.
and,
Right.
and
So
forbid the wrong.
let me jump in and just say, one example of that is kosher, right? And I
Mhm.
want to bring up something which we won't talk about right now, but I want to have you both think about it, because I'd love to have you back on a future show. We're at the end of our hour. In the
Okay.
past, we've gone another hour afterwards, and I've enjoyed it, but I'm trying in 2024 to shorten it and keep us all honest by keeping us closer to that 1 hour mark.
Got it.
But for a future show, I want to have you back and talk about this idea that I have. I'll confess this is my own idea, but as I look at the dispensations of Adam, Noah, um, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, what I see is God's creative force, his goal of elevating us, of helping us with our jihad as individuals and as a species to evolve into the kind of people that he would like. And this happens in waves of expansion and consolidation. So you have Adam, who's told to be fruitful and multiply. And then you have Noah, who says, or God tells Noah, look, every thought of man's heart is only evil continually. And he reduces us back down to a few families. And then you have Abraham, where he says, leave your father and mother and become the father of many nations and descendants that you can't count. And then he takes Moses and says, take these few tribes and make a little city on a hill. And then you have Jesus, where he says, preach the gospel to the whole world as a witness. And he condenses the law into these two things: love God and love your neighbor.
Right.
And it's a free for all. And we have, as a result, the decadent Western Judeo-Christian society. And then you have Muhammad, who says, no, we need to focus on the law, and you should memorize every verse and you should live by every verse of God. Of course, Jesus said the same thing, but the emphasis, right? The emphasis was slightly different. So you're either expanding dramatically, or you're consolidating, you're teaching, you're sort of enforcing. This is something I'd like to talk to you, not now, don't respond at all. Just think about it. I'd like to talk about this when you look back from the Quranic perspective on what these various messengers of God did, and even these 100 scrolls. I'm forgetting the word again now.
Suhufs.
Suhufs, the 100 suhufs that were given over time. I'd love to have maybe that conversation and dive into that. But having said all that, and sorry for not giving you a chance to respond, I'll give you time to reflect, and we'll have you back. Fine. Let's talk for a moment about some of these chats, and let's make sure that we give a book to somebody. I don't know if you guys can see the chat over there on the right of your screen, but I can also show some here that I found interesting. Ralph Shoemaker early on in the show was responding in this manner when you were talking about what Islam meant initially. And we had then later a comment, which I found interesting, from Damon Goldman, who said, I just did a Bible study this morning on this topic. Strange how things like this come full circle. Now, that was when we were talking about Isaac and Ishmael and Hagar. Lord Kai here made this comment as right before you did that Abraham was the father of multitudes. And he was also commenting about having said perhaps negative things about the Quran earlier in his life when we were talking about that. So I was watching some of these chats as they came in when I was sharing my thoughts about the schism that ripped my denomination apart. The word was referencing the Catholic Church. So I don't know if any of these are particularly interesting to you. A.M. Sterling had this comment to make. There's just so many good comments tonight that it's not easy to express certainty in your belief in a way that doesn't offend.
I like that. I like whoever said that, they could get my book.
All right.
Because
A.M.
that
Sterling.
is that is so true. Because when you're trying to have an interfaith dialogue, and I'm listen, wait, if you can blast my website one more time please, everybody, just visit Interfaith Library. It's something there for everybody, and you will see. But whoever made this comment is exactly right. When you're trying to have an interfaith dialogue with people, you have to, one, be understanding of who you're talking to, and like we were raised with this, whether it's in secular or spiritual. Religious and political conversations are really hard to have with people because you have to pretty much walk on pins and needles so that you don't offend nobody, because especially in the English language, you can say one thing and it can be misconstrued. Let me give one example, and this is off topic a little bit. And I think, the academics in this audience will appreciate this. I was asked once, what is the definition of nice? Nice. And I understood this from a lexical point of view. And the person was very shocked. I said, when the word nice was introduced into the English language, it wasn't a positive one. In fact, if you go into a thesaurus, most of the time, the first 2 or 3 definitions are negative. It's not until the 3rd or 4th definition that we have this positive consent of nice. So now that we know that, and me and you and I, we could be having a conversation and the person can interject, and I can feel like that interjection is asinine. I mean, like, he was nice. That was a nice thought. Exactly. You would laugh because you know the context in which I said it. But that person will run and say that Brother Mekye agreed with everything I said because he said it was nice. And this is the thing that I'm saying about the scriptures. Most people who read the Bible in Western society read it from the language which they spoke. They don't read it from the original language. In Islam, it is very much encouraged throughout, whatever era or period of time, that even if you don't know the whole Quran, it is incumbent upon you to learn verses in the original language so that you can have a better understanding, because there's words in the Quran that you really can't translate in English. You use the word Wade, and I'm going to use it when you talk about Allah or God's omnipotence. He's omnipresent, omnipotent, all of these, but most people have to go to the dictionary to look at it. And no, that word is probably the closest way to describe. In Surah Ikhlas, we have a Surah 112 of the Quran. Allah, if I may recite it, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Kul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu somad, lam yalid, wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. And then basically in saying, say that God is one, ahad. Now, this is not one as a number or a singularity, but most people who read it textually will say, oh, that means, see, God is one single entity. That's not what that verse said. He's one without partners. You don't set no partners for him, because we go back to the Old Testament where God says in the Ten Commandments, I am the Lord thou God. There is no God but me. And I'm bringing this up because the second ayat or second verse in that says, Allahu Samad. And that word Samad is so hard to translate in English. You know, he's basically eternal in every way. There is no beginning, there will be no end. And the irony is, and I'm going to end with this note, we have this thing in Islam. Anybody can become a man. We don't have to get baptized. You don't have to get water sprinkled on you. You don't have to go through no ritual. To become Muslim, all you have to do is say, I believe that there's only one God and that the Prophet Muhammad was one of his messengers or was his messenger. That's basically makes you Muslim. But I'm saying when you say it in Arabic, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah. Most Christians and Jewish people or what don't realize that that testimony of faith comes from the first commandment. I am the Lord thou God. There is no God but me. And so these are the reasons why in Islam, it is important that we learn the Arabic language. And I like to end with that.
Thank you. There were a number of comments in the chat that to me seemed to be in Arabic as well. Here's one from Heartfelt Son who made a number of comments. I have no idea what that is.
Oh, Hanafi Fiqh. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
And he also reminded us not to forget Greek in terms of, you know, some of the languages.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I also want to I want to go ahead and say that A.M. Sterling, I think we have your address because I think you've previously won a book. It's been a while on the show, and happy to send you the book from Imam Mekye. But I'd like to award a copy of my book then to The Word, right? Who commented, yes, there does. That flew by. In other words, he wants to have you guys back. And I also want to honor Lord Kai by explaining that he clarified, no, he had not been speaking ill of the Quran. He was referring to reading the Quran. So I shouldn't, I misunderstood that he had said, yes, been there, done that.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
So anyway, thank you. And
do me a favor, Wade, that address to the person you want me to send the book to, if you have his email address or an address where I can contact with him, just let me get that so I can get his address and I'll send his book to him.
Yep. 1 second, I'm just typing in the chat here. And then in case A.M. Sterling is already out, congrats. And I'll just say if your address hasn't changed, if your address has changed, let us know.
Alhamdulillah.
All right. So I only have one more thing to do other than to say once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming and sharing your faith with us on Created in the Image of God. It's just been a rich blessing to have you here tonight. I want to let everybody know that next week, we will also have a returning guest, Barbara Brehan, who is a associate pastor of a Baptist church in Virginia, will be back with us. And she and I will be talking about some of the initiatives that we have been doing together since we met on the show, including the Hillcrest Orchard Camp program, what we did down at the Desert Rose Baha'i Center, and some exciting things that are coming up next year in her neck of the woods in Virginia, where she has several Christian pastors across different denominations cooperating to bring a program for young people to her area. So Hamza and Mekye, thank you so much for being here tonight. Well. And I do hope you'll accept our invitation to come back again soon and continue this conversation.
Would love to.
Any final comment that you'd like to leave with our audience?
Well, I mean, if I can leave out with Islamic prayer, I like people to always hear the tone of our language, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
All right, if everyone just, do what we do in prayer. Basically, before I go, so that everyone understands, I'm just praising God for allowing us to have this moment. And I'm also going to ask him to forgive me for anything that I have misspoke or anything that I have said that have entered your heart and wasn't correct or didn't feel correct with you. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. Allahumma anta rabbi la ilaha illa anta khalaqtani wa ana abduka wa ana ala adika wa wadika masadatu. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء لك بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. آمين.
Amen.
So thank you again. And to everyone, same place, same time next week, 8 p.m. Central, created in the image of God. Between now and then, have a wonderful week, and may God be with you.